How many times have you heard, well, I support that cause, but just not like that? Maybe that person is talking about somebody else taking a knee, or marching in the street, or staging a boycott, or raising a defiant voice at City Hall. But underneath it runs the same old tired refrain. That's not respectful. That's too much. Isn't there a nicer way? Well, this sentiment leads me to bring up probably the most irksome social play I've encountered in my work and life, tone policing. Now look, I have to be clear. It's often one of the final defenses of the status quo, and it's the behavioral choice that has made me the angriest and most frustrated in my life. Look, I am outgoing, I'm excitable, I'm energetic, but I'm also a sentient, mature, sensible human being. Most of the time. Far too often, I personally, and I've seen it among other melanated women as well as queer women, younger women, anyone who doesn't fit into a quiet, reserved mold. I'm actually including neurodiversity in this as well. Being told, tone down, smile more, say it differently, etc., etc. No one says this to men, ever, ever, ever. And when tone policing affects white women in our society, it's often presented as a suggestion, not an imperative. Stick with me here. Tone policing happens when people, often those with the most comfort and security, try to dictate how others demand their own freedom. It's the suggestion that if you just ask a little more quietly or present yourself more properly, you'd be listened to, included, or taken seriously. There's like a litmus test. And it's a ruse. You tone it down, but nothing changes. And that's because power rarely listens unless it's forced to. Things don't change until they're changed. I spend a lot of time in my courses unpacking respectability politics, which is the pressure to protest the right way for approval, and how this has always been about making the powerful comfortable, not making justice more reachable. And this is something that is present in the history of Black America, and I know it well. I've always been a rebel, and I've never fit. I can play the game of respectability, but only until a certain point, and then the whole house comes crumbling down. So this lived experience has led me to want to investigate the reasons for tone policing. Now, I know the reasons for respectability politics as a social and political play during the post-enslavement late 1900s into the 20th and 21st century. It was a way to survive, to get legitimacy, to get ahead, right? You can check out the course for more on that. But let me just also say, sometimes it goes a little cattywampus. Black and brown and other people of color are well familiar with this trope. It is strongly seen across generational divides, right? Your old auntie or the abuela dictating what is proper behavior and what is not. But I want to zoom out for a moment and discuss the intersection of tone policing with whiteness, because this is our final session, and so let's go out with a flourish. Tone policing is harmful to women of color because it shifts attention away from the injustice that they are naming to the way they express themselves, right? Form over function. This silences their experiences, or it can, and it maintains and upholds existing power imbalances. Women of color, notably Black women, are often stereotyped as angry, aggressive, or unprofessional. So when their tone is criticized, their legitimate anger about racism or sexism is dismissed instead of addressed. This undermines both anti-racist and feminist work. Now, I want to acknowledge these stereotypes can harm any outspoken women. But like I said, when they are combined with other identity intersections, particularly race, ethnicity, class, or queerness, the harm is compounded. Being repeatedly told to calm down or say it more nicely, or not taken seriously or considered to be a distraction or a mirthful form of delight, all of this is gendered and racialized microaggressions that forces women, here again I'm primarily talking about women of color, but the behavior comports well beyond that, to self-center. It increases stress and it contributes to worse mental health outcomes, such as anxiety, depression, and burnout. It can also lead to career setbacks, social isolation and exclusion, and all-around poor socioeconomic outcomes. Every time protest is sanitized for palatability, voices are silenced, especially the voices of those who have few polite options left. Judging what is acceptable makes the powerful judge, jury, and gatekeeper over the movements, any movements that threaten their comfort. Disruption is not the enemy. Disrespect is not refusing to bow. It's insisting people must earn the humanity only in ways that suit the privileged. I'd like to think of two women from my book who exemplify a refusal to be pigeonholed. First is Buffalo Calf Road Woman, a northern Cheyenne warrior who rode into the battles of Rosebud and Little Bighorn, reportedly saving her brother's life, and in some oral histories, dealing the final blow to Custer at the last stand, directly defying U.S. military power on the plains. Also Claudette Colvin, who at age 15 refused to give up her seat as a white passenger on the Montgomery bus months before Rosa Parks. She endured arrest and ostracism, but she served as a plaintiff in the court case that struck down bus segregation. So Claudette confronted Jim Crow head-on when polite appeals had failed. And then looking at the global historical lens, I think of Queen Zinga, who ruled in 17th century Central Africa in the kingdoms of Dongo and Matamba in what is now Angola. She refused to accept Portuguese humiliation in diplomacy, famously improvising a throne which was actually made of her male subjects, rather than sit on the floor. And she spent decades waging military and political campaigns to block the slave trade and defend her people. Zinga forged alliances with neighboring African kingdoms and even the Dutch, sheltering runaway slaves and turning Matamba into a base strong enough to force Portugal into peace on her terms. All of this made her a lasting symbol of African anti-colonial defiance and political ingenuity. Or Sawina Mangu, a late 19th century queen of the Azna people in what is now Niger, facing French conquest during the Voulay-Chanoine mission of the 1890s. When most regional chiefs submitted, she organized armed resistance and used guerrilla tactics and strategic retreats to inflict serious losses on a much stronger invading force, protecting her civilians by hiding women and children before battle and ambushing French troops in the dense bush. Now, although ultimately outgunned, her stand became legendary in Niger as proof that empire was not invincible. I also think about La Negra Charlotta Lukumi, an enslaved Yoruba-descended woman of the 19th century colonial Cuba who was active in the 1843 Triunvirato Rebellion. Enslaved on a sugar plantation, she helped lead an uprising that attacked plantations and challenged colonial authorities, choosing violent revolt over continued bondage and retaliation for abuse, coordinating with other rebels through coded drum messages, captured and executed with extreme brutality. She later became an icon of Black resistance in Cuba along the UNESCO slave route. Each of these leaders, outspoken, disruptive, unladylike, proved again and again that real change comes from shaking the table, not waiting for a polite invitation. There is no single right way to stand against injustice. Some march, some sing, some sit in, some write letters or refuse to pay taxes, some interrupt meetings or chain themselves to parliament doors. History has always been rewritten by those willing to make too much noise. So let history remind us, change didn't come from waiting nicely for permission. Progress accelerates when those denied listen to their pain, claim their anger, and wield it creatively on their terms.